Final Fantasy VII Rebirth goes all in with the content, and after playing it early, I'm still in shock how insanely massive it is. With only a bit to go until the full launch, it's time we go over the ultimate preview of all the new content, features, and amazing things that we'll get to see. And since launch day is approaching rapidly, I'm giving away 2 copies of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. All you have to do is to be a subscriber of the channel, leave a like on the video, and comment below what feature are you looking forward to the most in the full game. Winners will of course be announced before release day. Now the story picks off right after our escape from Midgar, and in the starting hours it seems to follow the original FF7 story quite faithfully. Of course, Rebirth will span the events from the moment we leave Midgar all the way to the Forgotten Capital. However, the order in which certain things happen might change, so the story already went through a pretty mind-numbing twist following the revelation at the end of Remake, and more recently all the trailers showing that Zack isn't just alive and well, he'll actually play a much bigger role in Rebirth. In fact, there's supposed to be a whole episode dedicated just to him, and there are clear hints he's going to be a playable character as well, which kinda throws a big wrench into basically everything, into why things happened the way they did back in the original, how characters, especially Cloud, evolved the way they did, and so on. So right now, the theory that gained most traction is that, well, we have a multiverse situation on our hands. Possibly after our fight with Sephiroth in the remake, we ended up in an alternate timeline where Zack is somehow still alive, but our heroes may still be the ones from the original universe where he is not. And in this process, Sephiroth, who knows of these alternate timelines as well as their outcome, might pull off a final rabbit out of the entire Mako livestream hat trick, besides just generally manipulating Cloud at every turn. In any case, if that's just a distraction or not, it looks like we're getting a lot more story content on our hands too, with the main narrative announced to be around 40 to 50 hours long and easily 100 for all completionists out there who want to explore and finish everything. So that's quite a bit more than the previous game, and of course the best way to showcase this difference is taking a look at the world map. Of course, the open world being on a completely different scale than the one in the remake. Now during my hands-on session we got to play through a few zones, including the Grasslands, which was already big but still only a fraction of the entire world map, which was like 6 other similarly sized regions including the ocean. So most regions from the original FF7 are there, except a few, like for example Wutai, obviously being kept for part 3. And it's all a continuous map too, so it's all seamless, no loading screens, at most corridors or gaps that you'll find occasionally in between hidden zones, but most of it, you see it, there's usually a way to get there. The other difference is that we'll get a lot new optional towns and places that weren't even part of the original FF7. So going over a full regional breakdown, we have the Grasslands. This is where our adventure resumes in the present day, located just south of Midgar. The main hub here is Calm, which is practically a full-blown city, bustling with life, lots of interactions, including ones with your Avalanche members. Now during my game session, I was blown away by how dense it all seemed, and there were these side quests already available when I reached this spot. Places to visit, and of course lots of NPCs selling items or teaching you about some of the starting mechanics, including the Folios and relationships that we'll check in just a bit. But outside Calm we have the Grasslands. This is when the game truly opens up. It's a nice twist of green fields and occasional human settlements with enemies, loot spots, and secrets scattered in between, and also recognizable boss encounters that I'm sure many fans of the original will absolutely love or hate, depending how well prepared you go in them. In fact, this is also where you get your first Chocobo mount, which is done via a pretty quick side mission early on. Then we have the Nibel Region, Nibelheim of course being where the demo started during Cloud's flashback scene with Sephiroth. Both the village and the Shinra Manor are available in fact to explore in the later stages of the story. And the change here is that the whole sequence with unlocking Vincent Valentine will only give him as an accompanying character in Rebirth and not as a playable one. So you don't get to control him, that's going to be reserved for part 3 it seems. He still has his cinematic moments, but it's one of the many things that got altered from the original. Then there's Junon. This already features one of those new towns I mentioned called Crow's Nest. So besides Junon and under Junon, around this time we get the choice to also visit this Crow's Nest town as a new and optional location. So this is an entire town. People here already know of Avalanche, and there are still side stories and even quests you can get involved into. Now, early previews mentioned that this is one of the areas you could go right before heading to Junon and having the whole inauguration scene there with Rufus. So maybe this is going to be one of those things you can choose to do before going on the main path. But there are other such locations announced in pretty much all regions compared to the original. Then there's Corel with the two main hubs of Costa del Sol and the Gold Saucer. The resort area especially looks really good, and it has these Segway-like electric scooters that you can use to go around with. I really like the looks of those, but it seems that they are mostly reserved just for this area. And we've seen quite a bit of footage of these two places, as well as many of the mini games that we'll get to play while here. So yeah, you're gonna recognize quite a lot of returning ones from the original FF7, including G-Bike, 3D Battler, and the Chocobo Races, of course, with a modern makeover, but there are lots in there that are completely new, so we're gonna check that in just a bit. Obviously, since it was mentioned, Zack plays a big role. Gongaga is probably going to have even more things added to it than before. I'm fully expecting a lot more things compared to the original. And of course, we do know that Zack's hometown is also fully explorable, as well as the nearby Mako reactor. And since we talked about going down memory lanes, of course, Cosmo Canyon region, we get to visit Red 13's hometown, learn a bit more about his past, his family, assuming of course the events unfold similarly to the original story. The place also seems to have some unique traversal mechanics involved here via some of these floating fans. In fact, various regions have different mechanics. Even Gongaga had some of these trampoline plants you could use with various chocobo mounts. Now that's because mounts are going to be huge in this game. We have a handful of them already confirmed and possibly even more that weren't. Including the yellow chocobo. This is your default ground mount. You can get it pretty fast in the game, and it does a decent job at running swiftly and navigating normal terrain. But there are at least 3 more chocobo variants with different powers. So we saw blue that can jump over water but also has seemingly this ability to fly or at least glide from big heights. Then we had the black variant. This can climb extremely steep slopes and mountain ranges. Then we had the buggy, of course, all-terrain vehicle that actually makes a return from the original, of course most adept at crossing desert sands. I also mentioned the wheelie at the Costa del Sol resort. This is probably going to be the thing that we're going to use to go around the area. It does seem that it's mostly tied to this place, but it also seems to involve some kind of mini games too. And we've seen others, including water vehicles, which will likely be the way to get around the ocean regions or other water locations. Besides this, there's also the rest stops that we can bring back up to help us with fast traveling. And besides resting and buying consumables like how we did before, we can also now fiddle with the Folios machine, which was added to them. So this is going to let you just respec your character on the fly. Now, since we were talking about world travel, one of the major objectives for each region is going to be these new Ramna Wave Towers that you get to unlock through Chadley's new series of World Intel Progression. Early on, Chadley gives you a tool that helps you unlock them, which in turn uncovers additional objectives and encounters around it. So this can range from special, higher level boss encounters, puzzles, and even some of these new Moogle areas with their own minigames and rewards. Each area has its own regional track, and the more you contribute to that world intel, the more materia and VR battles Chadley will be able to unlock for you. And just like in the other game, they'll prove to be some of the strongest upgrades you can get too, so it's especially going to be worth it, even more so for the summons. So let's talk about the summons, because the game is going all in with this one. We have both returning ones from the remake as well as ones from the original. So we saw Odin. He seems to be primarily using the Sentetsuken now. Likely his one-shot mechanic is still in the game. Assuming that it is kept, it's going to be one of the most challenging fights to defeat. Then we saw Alexander, the Holy Element summon. Similarly, we saw a fight against him in the combat sim, so probably something we can unlock as a materia too. We also got trailers showing others, including Kujata, Phoenix, Bahamut, Fancy Chocobo, and the few ones that you also get from the pre-order bonuses. But some of the remake summons you already had will transfer to Rebirth too. So for example, Ifrit and Shiva is something that everybody starts with, but there is also a safe progression transfer bonus that you get if you already played FF7 Remake or the Intergrade. So Leviathan is something that you get as a save transfer bonus if you play the remake, and Ramu from the Intergrade save game. And of course, we had Titan. This is actually one that you can unlock quite early from one of Chadley's VR battles, of course, once you do unlock that in the simulator. However, there's one new mechanic added here to make things a bit more interesting, which is something called summon crystals. So each region has a few of these, and if you successfully complete them, this both weakens that summon fight in the combat sim, but also strengthens its corresponding materia once you get to use it. So for the best possible summon and its best variant, this is something that you'll definitely want to complete, but obviously these regions are going to involve its own mini game, and you're going to have to discover these secret locations before completing them. Now, combat is another aspect that got a number of very exciting upgrades. Obviously, the active and classic combat modes are still there, should you want to choose between real-time direct control or focus on abilities through the action menus, you still have the possibility to do so. However, synergies are the hot new feature, and you can think of them as a mix between normal abilities and limit breaks. So as you cast normal abilities on different characters, this is going to add to their synergy points. And once you build enough of these points, usually like 2 or 3 per character, you can then unleash one of these really powerful combination attacks that 2 characters will use together. So you'll usually build them fairly quickly, and there are synergies between pretty much all the characters and combos you can think of. Say you really like playing with a specific set of party members, you can then unlock more synergy abilities between them in the Folios page and really get some of the strongest attacks right away. And there's another combo mechanic similar to this, it's called guarding synergy. So the way you access this is by simply holding down the guard button, which opens up a new quick menu with a bunch of skill combos you can then use between these 2 characters by pressing X, triangle, and so on. So they tend to be a bit less effective than the synergy combos, but at the same time they can also be cast a lot more often. So when you're there blocking with a character, while you're doing that and tanking an incoming attack, you can use another party member to cause one of these combos to pull up and deal some nice damage. But like I said before, all of this gets unlocked via the new character folios, complete new skill trees for each of the playable characters, exclusive for the remake. As I said in my early preview, I was blown away by how many active nodes there are and how many useful and strong active abilities they get to unlock. Not just synergy skills, but other mechanics to power up all characters in meaningful ways. Folios are super easy to reset as well, so you can head over to any Folios NPC in towns or any of these machines at rest points to allocate points however you see fit, or reset and go for different combinations. So it's really going to incentivize testing things out and seeing which party setup works the best for you. Now, to invest into nodes, you'll of course need skill points, which you get from simply leveling up or from using manuscripts just like in the remake. However, to unlock extra skill cores, you're going to have to improve your overall party level. So let's talk about the party level and relationships. So the party level, which is visible on most of the character screens, shows how strong your party is and will raise by overcoming challenges as a team, which means fighting mobs, completing side missions, helping other teammates, and partaking in other side activities. So the more you do this, the more the entire party levels up and the more skill nodes this unlocks for everybody. And it's not only the party level that you'll want to care for, but also your relationship status with the other team members, which gets displayed over their heads usually when you are in towns, but you can also see it in its dedicated menu. Now, you start with neutral and can improve or even diminish this depending on how you interact with each character. So you will get to actually influence all of this by the responses that you give whenever you interact with them or complete missions, or whenever you're accepting or not accepting to help them with their own certain situations. So for example, you can go out on drinks with your friends or even dates, help others with their own problems and tasks, and so on. And it's not just Aerith or Tifa, but everybody, even Barret and Red, which have their own cool moments. And this in turn can also have story consequences, at least from what was indicated during my play session, like which character you can bring with you later on at the Gold Saucer, but there are others too. I'm not expecting full-on branching narratives here, but there are lots of moments you can have that you otherwise can completely miss out on if you don't build up this relationship. And I also noticed things playing slightly differently depending on how I chose to get involved with certain characters or not. Of course, to finish off, we have a few other changes here to characters and combat. So for example, we noticed quite a few combat changes to existing characters. For example, in the case of Cloud, his Punisher mode was the one that I loved the most. It now affects a much bigger area as he does this really cool cross slash, but you'll still have to make sure that the enemy doesn't move away. It's really great at building up the stagger bar, though it's also good at dealing damage once you do fully stun the enemy. You can also then dodge straight out of it back into operator as usually, and in this case, Cloud also now gets these ranged wind attacks on every sword swing. So this can help to deal damage from afar, but it's also great against enemies that are normally weak to wind damage, as it completely shatters their stun meter. Similarly, Aerith now becomes more mobile. Her triangle ward shift move now lets her teleport quickly to any ward that she has placed down on the battlefield. So she's still somewhat more static than the others due to how she fights, but quite a bit more nimble than in the remake. So you can set up a ward on the other side of the area, and if anything attacks you while you're trying to set up your attacks, this can help you to quickly disengage and squeeze in a few more hits. Now, I didn't see anything completely new to Tifa and Barret besides the synergy attacks, but Red 13 is definitely one of the new outliers. He has some great moves as he's obviously the new playable character. So Red is all about being super swift, doing counter attacks, and providing massive stagger via the Vengeance mode that he has. So Vengeance mode fills up the more when you guard attacks, which you can then follow up to perform a counter for a big damage hit. But once the Vengeance mode is filled, you can then turn it off and kind of enter this Rage mode that basically makes you even faster and deal even higher damage. Traversal wise, there have been some massive improvements too, and not only that, different characters will have different mechanics. So besides the mounts, characters also have their special movement mechanics, like for example Cloud. He's better now at traversal on foot, doing a bit of parkour over there, and just better at jumping over obstacles, even ones that are quite big. Then there's Tifa. She has a grappling gun that she can use to quickly zip towards higher up places. Yuffie, who's also playable, has something similar, though she can swing with her rope across gaps which are otherwise inaccessible or out of reach for other party members. Then there's Barret. He can shoot stuff to clear a path ahead or even make objects drop within reach, like for example ladders and whatnot. Then there's Aerith. Her ability to manipulate the live stream finally comes into play, so that's also interesting to see over here. I'm not sure if we had this in the remake, but maybe a few cinematic moments in which she did use the powers. Red 13, of course, he's super nimble and he can climb along walls higher and faster than anybody. And of course, finally, Kate Sith. He can grab and throw heavier objects, similarly to Barret, to destroy things in the environment. And obviously all of this will help a ton because the side content and the side missions in this game are going to be amazing. So all the jobs, aka side quests, are back again. One thing that I'm glad that they've done in the Rebirth compared to the remake is that now you can totally complete them even after finishing or passing certain story moments, at least from what it was announced. So this was something that wasn't really possible in the remake because once you progressed too far into later chapters, you were not able to return back and this locked you out of certain missions. So this way you can now tie loose ends at the end of it and go back since obviously the game is no longer linear. It does seem that Odd Jobs also continue some of the stories with familiar characters, like for example, I'm definitely looking forward to the shenanigans that Johnny will pull off, but also there's Kyrie and even completely new characters exclusive for the Rebirth. Interesting to note is that many Odd Jobs in the remake could branch out and have completely different endings and rewards depending on your choices during them, like for example Madame M's questline back in remake. So no doubt we should see quite a bit of that here too, maybe even more. Besides these, another piece of side content are the Proto Relics investigations. Now these are multi-part side stories that you get from Chadley, where you get to investigate artifacts of unknown origin that emit a unique energy signal. So pretty much each region has a few of them, and there's a whole side narrative that you'll follow involving different unique characters and also unique encounters. And Square Enix was teasing that something major will happen once we discover all of them. However, the Proto Relics have a peculiar detail about them. They seem to alter space-time and are known to cause strange phenomena. So this could maybe involve a process of creating something called Proto Materia, which also gives users access to unique ancient powers, like for example the power of Chaos. Interesting is that Chaos was also Vincent's limit break, so I wonder if we'll see some of those unique transformations for Cloud 2, if that's even a possibility, given how Vincent isn't actually playable yet. So this could definitely be one of the outcomes, but maybe we could access some other really amazing powers that normal Materia doesn't give you. Now, on the subject of Materia, there have been some unique new additions here too. Likely you've seen quite a number of them in the demo, as there have been like 5 or so easily missable ones. So slotting Materia is pretty much the same as it was before. You can place it on weapons, gear and accessories depending on the number of slots that you have. But we've seen quite a number of cool new examples right from the starting minutes. So Comet was one of them. This allows you to cast down a meteor from the sky, dealing non-elemental damage where it lands, and higher star versions of this will of course drop bigger objects with bigger damage. Then I saw a few combo materials that use different elements together. Like for example, there was fire and ice, which used both those elements at the same time in one attack, which opens up some interesting synergies when factoring in enemy weaknesses. Then I saw Spare Change. This is kind of like a gambling materia. It allows you to consume gil to deal damage to enemies. So you can sacrifice between like 1,000, 10,000 gil and hit enemies for some really big damage. By my calculations, it should be around 1,000 to 1,500 for each 10k gil that you spend, but obviously that's a big sum of money. Then we've seen Auto Cast. This seems to be an upgrade from Auto Cure that we had in the remake, so you can now link it with any spell and auto cast it on any character that you don't currently control. There's a level boost. This increases the level or the stars that a materia has by 1, but of course it only works on materia that isn't max level. And finally, Precision Defense, another one that extends the perfect blocking window, which should actually be amazing for Cloud's parry stance switch. It's one of my favorite abilities in the game, so this should definitely help in the starting hours. Moving on rapidly, we have loot. Now, one of the aspects I'm majorly excited for is going to be the drip in FF7 Rebirth, as in the armors / outfits and cool looking gear that we will get, because it seems that we're gonna get some amazing looking ones just from the trailers we've seen, way more so than the remake. So it's undeniable that Cloud as well as the rest of the party will get access to some amazing looking gear and outfits. There were about 9 unlockable ones in the remake, so I'm fully expecting some of the side stories and choices to provide even more this time around. We also have a completely new item crafting mechanic. It's called the Item Transmuter, and this is going to let you craft new armors, accessories, and so on with the mats that you collect from the open world and from defeating mobs. So the more you craft, the higher your craftsmanship will get, which unlocks new formulas with even better stuff to create along the line. So even your mounts, for example, get armors with different looks and effects, and some of them you can even buy from merchants in towns and in cities. Like for example, from the Choco Boutique, there are quite a few you can buy from early on, but obviously craftables might be better, or the ones that you get exclusively from certain quests. But like I said, minigames are going to play an even bigger role this time around, and many of them that were revealed are accessible via certain side missions and odd jobs, but many more are actually available straight up from the popular Gold Saucer. So G-Bike, who can forget the bike chase scene back in the remake, and you probably also played this in the original, but this is the makeover and now it's turned into its own minigame. So it still seems to play around the same. You have your left and right attack, guard, spinning slash, nitro boost, and there are likely multiple levels to beat, given how in this case we have to beat higher scores, and likely this is going to help us reach the max prizes. I'm just like curious what they are going to be. Then there's the 3D Battler, another returning one. You get to fight 3D versions of various characters in a brawler style fighter game. Looks awesome and does seem to have quite a bit of skill involved, so you have directional dodging and limit breaks, so definitely looks really nice. Another returning one is the Chocobo Racing. This is probably the one I'm most excited for, just because Chocobos were pretty fun to control when I played the game, and it looks like you can collect skill fruits for different abilities like dash, charges, and so on. And there's also a water variant of it involving dolphin races, so this looks even more fun, but the objective is of course the same. It's rather simple: collect as many points as possible and use abilities possibly against other contenders. We've seen more, like for example, there's this 2D space shooter. We've seen a football game involving Red 13. There's also a shooting gallery and also performance dances, like if you remember that cloud dance scene back at the remake. Of course, this is going to now have its own version, even ones with like the whole military and whatnot. And of course, returning ones like the Shinra Box Smash minigame from the remake, which seems to have gotten an upgrade and new challenge tracks. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to all of these minigames as well as their rewards. But probably by far the biggest of them all is obviously going to be the Queen's Blood. I went over this a bit in the hands-on preview, but it seems there's an even bigger emphasis on it than I thought. So it definitely looks like most, if not all, major towns and cities will have a bunch of matches that you can play with various other players. So there's a whole tournament going on, and besides just winning battle cards from them, you can also purchase additional packs from various vendors around the cities. Like for example, I know that the general vendor back in Calm do sell a few great starting packs that you can use against some of the starting fighters. The rules aren't overly complex either. It involves just strategically placing units on each tile while also taking into account that you can boost at the same time other nearby tiles. So the more yellow tiles that you overlap, the higher the power you can also make, so that you can either cast more powerful creatures on those tiles or just power up the existing ones that are already there. And at the end, each line you and your enemy have will be accounted for, and only the winning lane will have its powers added to the final score, whichever player wins it. So you either have to win by having more winning lanes, or have a lane with such a high winning number that it exceeds the total number of your opponent. But obviously, other strategies will likely come up once the game comes out. Now, on the performance side and graphics, obviously you get the choice between quality mode or performance. Personally, I played with performance both in my preview as well as in the demo, as I prefer 60 FPS. And also recently it's been announced that performance mode will get a patch to fix the washed out and low quality textures, so this will be available for the full game as well. In my play session when we went to London, we actually did have, I think, this implemented already, so for me I did not notice any washed out graphics. Otherwise, looks really awesome, and the quality mode is going to be 4K but lower frame rates, so that you have a more cinematic experience, but in combat you might want to still switch to performance. Obviously, the cutscenes are on a completely different scale even compared to the remake, with significant improvements to the cinematography and the way stories and characters are being framed. You're going to notice this throughout the remake, but the difference is quite big. Now, in terms of pre-order bonuses, you do get some really interesting stuff. So everybody gets the Midgar Bangle MK2 armor, which comes with like 18 defense and 1 materia slot if you pre-order the game. But this slightly differs if you pre-order this from the UK or not, as the UK does have a Midgar bandana and Shinra MK2 bracelet variant. For the digital deluxe edition, you get a few more, so you get an additional accessory, one called Reclaimant Choker, and the armor called Orchid Bracelet, plus the Magic Pot summoning materia. Now, unfortunately, they did reserve some summons for the collector's edition, so you will have to fork in quite a bit of money for that, about $349.99. And this gives you, besides all of these other rewards, also has the Mughal Trio summoning materia as an in-game DLC. And yeah, pretty much all of the others that you already get, but also the Sephiroth statue as a physical reward. And of course, you can see all the others right here on the screen. But personally, I kind of hate that they added the Mughal Trio just to the collector's edition. Obviously, in like 6 months to max a year, we should see them available for free in the full game anyway. This was the case with the remake, so I'm fully expecting this to also happen with Rebirth. Anyway, that's pretty much it with the full preview of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Of course, there's gonna be a lot more content following on the channel really soon, and even more so once we get closer to the release date, with guides, tutorials, gameplay, tips and tricks, and so on. So if you want to see more of FF7 Rebirth on the channel, totally leave a like on the video, subscribe, and even activate those notification bells if you want to be there early for all videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.